Welcome to Silicon Valley Buzz. I'm your host, Seth Shostak, and this is the show in which we discuss happenings in this, the most fertile spot on the planet for new ideas. The producer is Janet Wu. Tonight, policing San Jose. There are significantly fewer cops, 400 fewer cops than there were in San Jose just 5 years ago. And so what's the consequence? Are citizens right when they say that finding a cop in San Jose now is about equivalent to spotting a bald eagle? Is one of the safest cities in America no longer so? We'll be hearing why there's been a decline in the police force and what we can do about it. What are the consequences from my guests? And they are Jim Unland. Jim is president of the San Jose Police Officers Association and also a sergeant with the San Jose PD. Jim, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thank you. Yeah, we have gone down in staffing. We used to have about 1,400 officers back in 2008, actually. Today we're right around 1,000, which is a little confusing for maybe some of the viewers in that we don't have 1,000 on the street. At any one time, we may have 70 officers patrolling the city of San Jose, which has a population of just under 1 million. So we really are stretched thin. Districts that used to have 4 to 8 officers, usually on the 8 end, are down to 4. And so instead of patrolling, what we find ourselves is just going call to call and not doing a lot of proactive enforcement, which is how we used to keep a lid on things before.
Okay, we're going to get back to that in just a moment. Let me introduce the guy sitting next to you. That's John Donahue. And John is a professor of law at Stanford University. John, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
You heard what this gentleman said. There are fewer police on the beat, and the totals might still be impressive. 1,000 cops sounds like a lot of people. But Jim's saying there aren't too many people on the streets at a time. I'm going to ask you, so what? I mean, there are fewer cops. Is there really more crime? Does this have any effect, or does it just mean that the staffing is down?
Well, let me just take a moment to sort of give some overall numbers. In general, San Jose has had a relatively low crime rate, and as you mentioned, it's traditionally thought to be a very low crime city by comparison to cities across the nation. But it also has a relatively low staffing of police. So while people might be complaining about government expenditures, 1,000 police for a 1 million-person city is sort of on the low end of city police force sizes.
One per 1,000. I mean, what would it be in, I don't know, New York, Chicago? What would that be?
Well, New York would have maybe 35 times the number of police for 8 times more population. So it gives you a sense that it's quite a bit.
Nationwide, you're looking at about 2.5 per 1,000. And even at 1.4, which is what we were when we had 1,400 officers, stretched thin comparatively to those numbers. But we had enough officers to be proactive. We had enough units that were concentrated in different fields to really keep a lid on certain crimes. Now that we're 1 per 1,000 residents, we just can't do it anymore.
Well, let me ask you specifics. I mean, the crime that everybody thinks about, number 1, murder 1. What about homicides? What are the rates of homicide now compared to when you had 1,400 officers?
Yeah, just going back even to 2010, when we had even less than the 1,400, but still above the 1,000, we had 20 homicides that year. The next year we jumped to 40, and last year we were at 46. We attribute part of the rise during 2011 is when we disbanded, the late 2010 to 2011, we disbanded the Violent Crime Enforcement Team. These were officers that worked the street. They only did gang enforcement and really became experts in all the gangs in San Jose. We saw our gang homicides go from 2010, 6 up to 18 the very next year after the disbanding. So what the department then had to do was take another unit called Metro that dealt with street-level narcotics, street-level prostitution, homeless crimes, and move them to all gangs all the time. No surprise, we saw a rise in prostitution, street levels, homeless issues, homeless homicides. We had prostitutes coming from outside of the state because they got word that we just weren't enforcing those crimes anymore. Okay, so we're chasing our own tail.
Okay, so you're shifting the resources. But let me get this straight. Now, you said that there were 46 homicides last year.
46.
46. And 2 years earlier, there'd been half that number, something like
20.
that. Okay, but if you go back to, I mean, there was a time, I think there were, what, 31 in 2008, 53 in 1991. I mean, this is a pretty, noisy curve. I mean, are you sure that's, from a statistical point of view, is this significant?
No, if you look back over the last 20 years, we were always in the 20s. Maybe not 20, but 23, 25. We had 2 years in the last 20, taking away 2011, 2012, where we got just into the 30s. So we've always consistently had a homicide rate somewhere in the 20s. And to be here leveling at 40 last year, they called that an aberration. Well, now we have 2 years in a row, and it's continuing to go up. We just had our fourth just the other day, so we're still on track to be back in these 40s.
You mentioned gangs, the fact that you had a task force for gang control, and now you're having to move people from violent crimes. What fraction of the homicides are gang related? Is that a big fraction?
Usually it's half.
Half. Okay. John, I would ask you, I mean,
Yep.
in fact, nationally, crime is kind of down.
Yep.
Isn't that the case? So is Jim right that the fact that it's up here is just an enforcement issue, or are there, peculiarities about the Bay Area? I mean, what about San Francisco? Is crime down there, but up here?
Yeah. Well, let me just give you some sense. Jim mentioned in the early 90s, crime was quite a bit higher, and that was a pattern across the nation, that crime peaked in the early 90s, and then the entire nation enjoyed an enormous drop in crime through the 90s. Those were the sort of Valhalla years in terms of dropping crime. And, nationally, San Jose doesn't look that bad, but you're concerned when you see a jump from, 2.2 or something like that as the homicide rate, 2.2 per 100,000 up to 4.6, which is what it essentially was last year. So in general, the U.S. is a high crime nation, but San Jose was a low crime city and a high murder rate nation. We're actually not a high crime nation, but we're a high homicidal violence nation. But even that, with the numbers at 4.6, we're not out of line with the rest of the country, because the overall homicide rate is slightly higher than that for the nation. But as Jim mentions, when you get a jump up from in the 20s to 46, that's alarming. Now, sometimes there is a drug phenomenon that could be going on, but I think if you get a 40% drop in police force from a already low base, that would be a concern in general. So you wouldn't be surprised to see crime go up when you get a drop in police staffing of this level.
So somebody who looks at the big picture of crime, not just, of course, here in the South Bay, but nationwide and so forth, this sounds significant to you. I mean, this correlation stands up. This is not just because the gangs have gone nuts for a couple of years.
Well, there's always going to be variation in crime that is hard to explain, because new drugs come up and new gangs enter in. But as we look across the country, when New York had a really bad crime problem, one way they dealt with it was an enormous increase in police, and that did help them. They increased their police force by the size of the Chicago police force. So it's like you took every cop in Chicago, put them onto the New York police force, and that had an impact. So they cut back a little bit from where they were then. But they had 40,000 police at that point, now maybe about 35,000. And you can see their rate of staffing is about, 500 per 100,000 people, while here in San Jose it's about 100 per 100,000 police officers. So it's a lower level than New York, certainly, but it's even lower than Los Angeles, which would be closer to 200 per 100,000.
Yeah, so it's good news and bad news in a sense.
And what we're seeing is when we don't enforce certain crimes, that crime tends to go up in numbers.
Can you give me some examples? Because there are other special units there, right?
We talked about narcotics. What we have found, I used to be a part of the Narcotic Covert Investigations Unit, and this is a unit that worked undercover, dealing with mid to high level drug trafficking organizations, DTOs. What we have found is, because we don't do that anymore, that unit has been reconfigured to be called CREW, Covert Response Unit, primarily dealing with just fugitive apprehension and dealing with the worst criminals we have, the murderers, a lot of time spent there, so not on narcotics anymore. we have found that we have kind of become a safe haven for these DTOs. So the drug trafficking organizations are making San Jose kind of a distribution center because they don't feel that there's a high likelihood of them being caught. We've seen burglaries go up. We no longer do burglary investigations. That unit is gone. If there's somebody arrested in custody for burglary, that'll get taken over the DA's office, but there's no follow-up. We don't do truancy abatement anymore. Truancy abatement is the kids that should be in school, they're out, they're causing problems. A lot of burglaries happen by them. Our auto theft detail, we don't do investigations there either, again, if they're in custody. And so what we've seen is burglaries are up 33%, assaults are up 9%, auto theft up 39%, rape up 23%. So we've seen an increase in all of this. And then quality of life, if you go down and look at downtown San Jose, compare it to 10 years ago when we really had a handle on that, it's night and day. And we're seeing quality of life starting to affect businesses. I've talked to business owners that are actually relocating from downtown San Jose. They just don't want to do business there anymore.
It's been shown in New York, I think, that the sort of low-level crime has a big impact on the, if you will, the tenor of the populace. When they're seeing too many squeegee guys or whatever it is, apparently people feel that, a lot of graffiti, that the place is not safe. It's perceived danger as opposed perhaps to actual danger. I've read in the Mercury News people who say, look, we saw some burglary here, somebody broke into my neighbor's house or whatever. We actually saw the guy, but we're not getting any action. The police are not responding to this.
Yeah, you heard about the vigilante homicide a few weeks back, where an apartment manager and I think the maintenance manager went out to confront somebody they thought was doing a lot of auto theft burglaries, and they dealt with it themselves. It turned out to be a homicide. In trying to hold this person, he was shot and killed. So we always tell people, don't take matters into your own hands. That was always based on the premise that the police would be there to deal with it. When we're going out with 3 officers or 4 officers in a district, literally 1 or 2 calls wipes us out. There are no police to send, and that's the frustration. Most shifts go out, there are calls pending, and when they end their 10-hour shift, there's still calls pending.
What is the long-term effect of this sort of thing? I mean, is it more vigilantism? I mean, do people say, look, the police are not around, we're going to handle this ourselves? Is that what happens?
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem you have to worry about. And indeed, I think going forward, if the economy doesn't pick up and we don't deal well with the burdens of the retirement of the baby boom generation, budgets are going to be under stress throughout California. And so we're going to have to be smarter in dealing with crime. I think California has done some things well. I think they do better than many states in dealing with gun issues. But when you're up against states that don't do things so well, that puts burdens on California. I think the one lesson of history seems to be you want to deal with crime by making punishment sort of swift and certain. It's less important to be so severe. California has at times gone too far the wrong way. We want to put you away for the rest of your life or even kill you. That's largely wasted money. Put it on policing, actually, and you stop the number of people who have to get put away. So if you're concerned about dollars, that's really, I think, where the focus should be. Because police actually prevent crime. The difference between a 30-year sentence and life imprisonment isn't real important in a young criminal's mind.
That's not really effective. Well, you mentioned money. We're going to get back to that in just a moment. We're going to take a short break here, come back, find out why are there 400 fewer police in San Jose, and what can we do about that. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're back with Professor John Donahue. We're talking about the future of police. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San Jose. And we're talking about the future of police in San J
about today.
Welcome back to Silicon Valley Buzz. My guests are Jim Unland and John Donahue, and we're talking about policing in the South Bay. Okay, fewer cops, more crime, we've heard it. But of course, there's a simple explanation for why we have fewer officers. As I understand it, lack of money. And one of the big factors here has been the very sharp increase in pension costs, going up from $70 million to $240 million a year in essentially 3 years. How'd that happen, Jim?
Well, 08, 09 didn't help. The stock market crash affected everybody. There are other issues that are built into the system we have. I've been on record for over 2 years that we need to make changes to our pension plan. But the way the mayor went about it has really caused a lot of dissension and an exodus to give people an understanding of people leaving. We used to have 4 resignations a year on average in San Jose. 4 officers would leave, and actually about half of those would come back after a year of working at the FBI or somewhere else. We're at now where we're losing 6 a month, which equates to 70 a year, and we're not getting them back. And it's not just the young officers. We just had an officer resign today who has 22 years on, going to another agency.
But backing up a bit, I mean, the pension costs have gone up. Presumably, the city isn't paying them. Otherwise, these people aren't leaving because, you know, the city's paying more for their pension. It's because they have to pay more. The city's not paying it. What's the direct effect?
Well, we've always paid into our pension. Right now, we pay about 20% of our salary into our pension. So a top step officer who gets $100,000 a year pays $20,000 right off the top into his pension cost. What the mayor's plan was designed to do was to take that 20% and make it 45%. So 45%, $45,000 from a $100,000 salary would go into pension cost, and then taxes would come out after. None of our officers would be able to afford that. The other problem with the mayors is every attorney I've talked to, and we talked to a lot of them, has said what the mayor is trying to do is illegal, and it won't be held up in court.
Let's explain what the mayor is trying to do, because in 2011 he said, look, this is untenable, and he gets a ballot, Measure B, I think it was, on, you know, I mean, he gets a ballot initiative, right?
Yes.
And it passes with almost 70% of the vote.
Correct.
And it says pension reform, which to me means we got to do something to reduce the pension costs. Okay, sounds like end of story. Does he, you know, what happens?
Well, again, his version is going to be challenged in court. In fact, it is being challenged in court because it goes against 70 years of case law in California about vested rights. We had come with a plan that actually guaranteed the savings that we were saying our plan provided. It essentially put officers in a CalPERS plan that increased their age from 50 to 55. And so there were going to be hundreds of millions of dollars in savings. They said no to that. That's their right. But in saying no, they know we're looking at several years of court cost, several years of court, and probably not any savings in pension reform. That was passed over 6 months ago. We haven't seen a dime in savings yet. And that's been the real problem. And going forward, it's going to continue to be a problem.
Let me ask you, John. I mean, I have to say, retiring at 50 with a pension doesn't sound so bad to me. On the other hand, my line of work, I'm probably not going to get shot at. So there's a difference there. But, I mean, you know, putting this in perspective with the way things are elsewhere, you know, is this out of line? What's happening in San Jose? Does California pay too much money for pensions?
Well, I think Jim mentioned one factor that weighs into all of this, and you can see how the problems are also interrelated, is that the downturn in the economy hurt pension systems all across the board because those rely on investments, and when those funds are depleted, that's going to put more pressure on your system. And so we're sort of suffering some of the consequences, I think, of the sort of mismanagement of the economy in the 2000s. And until the economy picks up, we're going to have significant budget problems that have to be addressed. So people are going to have to make choices. Do we allocate our resources in a way that you know, is a more effective crime-fighting way? Even as you hear people talk about, you know, buying guns as a crime-reducing measure, it's probably a misallocation. If people spend about $5 billion a year on guns and ammo each year, if you took that $5 billion, you could get 100,000 more police, And Clinton showed actually during the 90s, put 100,000 more police on the streets and crime goes down. So that was one of his initiatives. And I'd much rather see the police have the 100,000 officers than 100,000 people holding on to guns.
Yeah, well, that may be, but I think that you'll have an easier time with one approach compared to the other, because after all, we're talking about taxes. I mean, couldn't we just, I don't know, raise the sales tax and then just cover this? Is that the way to go? I mean, are they paying too much into the pension fund in San Jose compared to a comparable city somewhere else?
Yeah, I'm not knowledgeable enough to know exactly the details, but it's been an issue for government strategies. Government pensions across the country, that they're not always handled as well as they should. But I'm not in a position to say whether San Jose has, made judgment errors of that kind or not. But it's something that state government and local governments have to be really attentive to, especially when resources are short.
There was a three-prong approach that the mayor talked about, and when the third prong, taxes, wasn't hit, that's why our chief left. First, he said he wanted a 10% pay cut from the employees of the city of San Jose. They did that. In fact, we're in our second year of a 10% pay cut. Secondly, he wanted Measure B passed. The voters did that. The third part of that was he was going to go to the voters and ask for a sales tax increase. They voted, with the mayor voting against it, 5-5, it deadlocked. And so Chief Moore, who's since retired just after 18 months on the job, realized, I'm just kind of set up to fail here. If you're not going to give me any more money and expect me to deal with these crime waves that we're dealing with no more resources, I can't do it. And that's a big reason why he left.
Okay, I mean, you've mentioned it. The officers are walking. A lot of them are walking.
Yeah.
Okay, and that says that they can get a job doing what they're doing somewhere else in a more favorable climate, financial climate.
Correct.
So, okay, what's your solution, Jim? What would you suggest?
Well, sadly, we think the next 2 years are going to be similar to the last 2 years. The mayor has set a course. They're not going to budge off this course. They're going to see this Measure B through. And so we don't expect any changes to happen. With a new mayor in 2 years, when Mayor Reed is termed out and 3 of his supporting votes on council are termed out, then we'll have probably an opportunity to reassess. I think the people of San Jose will have a chance to look, how many officers are here? Are you able to keep these academies? We have 44 officers in the academy right now. We do not expect them to stay. Their retirement plan is going to be so low, below market value, that they're going to take the training they get here. It'll be their introduction into this field, but this is not going to be their home. And so as that plays out, as the first couple academies also go on this exodus, something's going to have to happen. And I think the new mayor will have to come forward and say, this last mayor, this last council went too far, and we need to look at a legal solution to deal with these costs. I'm not arguing with anybody that we need to deal with these costs. I've been on board with that, with the media, with the council, with the Chamber of Commerce, that we need to do something about this. But the mayor has done it in such an adversarial and confrontational way, and his way or the highway. We'll see in court, and that's just where we're at, unfortunately.
How do you see it in the big picture? What's going to happen 10 years down the road? We're just going to have to pay more.
Well, yeah, I mean, pay more or allocate resources. I still think there are gains to be made. We went through a budget initiative, or excuse me, a referendum on the death penalty. That was probably one area where we could have taken some resources out of,
Save money by getting guys off death row.
Yeah, I mean, basically the government pays for the lawyers on both sides of death penalty cases. There's a lot of appeals, and it's largely wasted money.
How much does it cost? Just order of magnitude.
Oh, California has spent something like $4 billion on pursuing their death penalty. It's a huge amount of money over a period of time. So I just think when it comes to crime, you have to think, do I want to have a feel-good measure? Death penalty is a feel-good measure for some people. Or do you want to reduce crime? And I would say, I want to reduce crime. I don't care about feeling good by killing somebody or making political statements. I want to allocate resources in the most cost-effective way. That's the way business succeeds in America, and that's the way I think government needs to succeed in America, is allocate resources in the most efficient, cost-effective way. So I think there are things that can be done, but they're not always the popular ones. 3 strikes is another issue. They're starting to cut back on it, but I would be very reluctant to have a prison filled with geriatric 80-year-olds. It's just not a sensible way to run a system, but that's current law under 3 strikes. So, you know, if you look at the U.S., for 70 years, the United States had a prison population of roughly 100 per 100,000 people. That's what Europe does. We changed that and went the complete opposite way. We now have 7 times that level of incarceration. No society in world history has ever incarcerated at the level of the United States. A lot of that money is wasted. You're not targeting it, and targeting is the essence of policing and the essence of corrections. And we're not doing a good job of that right now.
All right, well, gentlemen, lamentably, we've run out of time here. San Jose policing, it seems to be maybe a microcosm of a larger problem. How do we balance the benefits against the wallet damage? And I suspect that whatever solution our neighbor city here to the south comes up with is likely to be a model for other cities as well. Thanks to my guests, Jim Unland and John Donahue. Thank you both for being here. I'm Seth Shostak. Thank you for watching Silicon Valley Buzz. Our producer is Janet Wu. This is her last show. I want to thank her for her efforts in making this show not only possible, but everything that's good in it is due to her hard efforts. Thank you very much. I'm Seth Shostak, and good night.